only seems like yesterday, but actually it was a long time ago now. When I left school, I had the privilege of getting a particular trade that was very similar to what a builder would do, what a plumber would do, what an electrician would do. It was kind of all of those things connected. And I had the immense privilege of working for a couple who took a huge interest in me. And years later, they said that they saw an element of leadership that they were kind of keen to foster, which was nice. They sort of didn't expect that in a trade circle as such. So I worked for this couple for a couple of years and learnt the technicalities of the job. After a couple of years, the contracting changed, and the guy I used to work for and myself, we were then employed by the company as employees. So we used to be contractors, but then became employees. And the change in the system was such that now the two of us became the call-out people for a 24-hour call-out service. And effectively, it meant that right back when cell phones were kind of new, I carried a cell phone with me. My boss's initial cell phone had like a whole kind of like battery and like a handpiece, and would have like 5% of the coverage that we have now. So it's amazing how technology's changed. Anyway, as time went on, the guy who I used to work for, he resigned, he found another opportunity, and so I was the 24-hour call out for this particular company. Notice I'm not naming the company. Anyway, so for 2 years, or 2.5 years actually, I fulfilled that role, and it effectively plunged my life into what I now reflect back on and would say it was chaos. And the problem with the machinery that we worked on was a lot of the time it broke down. It would be about 2 a.m. in the morning. So as a 19, 20-year-old, by the way, the geography was for the top half of the North Island. That was the other little piece. And so it was kind of crazy. So fast forward to the end of my 20th year, I'm sitting in a doctor's office, for some reason suffering major burnout. And when I explained to the doctor what I did, his words were, "Are you crazy?" All right. When you back the story up, before we were taken on, there used to be a team of 7 people that did that one role. And it came back to myself. And part of it was my naivety as a young person. The money was great, and the adventure was great because, hey man, I was like equipped to go anywhere and everywhere and turn up in all sorts of weird places. And, I could be up in the Coromandel one morning and then at the top of the ski fields the next day, that kind of thing. So it was a great job. But there was no rhythm. And God had moved massively in my life as a young person, and I would have said that I was a committed follower of Jesus, and I believe that I was, and I tried to witness everywhere and anywhere I could. However, the life I was living was crazy and unsustainable. And so it led me to a point of exhaustion and burnout. Now, my hunch is, for all of us who are in this room this morning, that if you think back to a time, or whether you might be in a time now, but if you think back to a time in which you were completely exhausted, like if you think back to a time of extreme exhaustion, my hunch is, while you might not have been racing all over the country with the energy of a 19-year-old, there will probably be a similar theme of a lack of rhythm and a lack of taking time out for yourself. That is not God's intended plan for his people. So last week we began to build a framework for rest. And we'll do a quick summary of that actually. So in our framework last week, we identified the following things. First of all, God himself, he created for 6 days and then he rested on the seventh. God then blessed the seventh day, and then God made the Sabbath day or the seventh day holy. And we unpacked that last week. You may also remember that the Hebrew word for Sabbath, Shavuot, can also be translated as the word delight. And so we briefly explored the idea that the Sabbath is something that should not be a chore, but it is something that we should look forward to, and it should be something that we delight in. So if you came away last week with those ideas in your mind, great, tick. This morning we're going to build on that. So if we could turn back to Exodus 16, and I just want to say, Don, thank you so much for reading that marathon piece of scripture this morning. You did really well, my friend, so thank you. But in Exodus 16, just in terms of context, this was the early stages of Israel being formed as a nation, and they were clearly learning a lot. It's interesting that when God calls these people together, one of the first things he does is he commands them to take full advantage of this day of delight. Now, was there heart in it? When you read that text, you get this idea that actually there was a lot of grumbling that was going on. There was all sorts of disbelief in one sense. But if we look back at verse 29, Exodus 16, verse 29, or in verse 28, it says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'How long will you refuse to keep my commands and my instructions?' And then in verse 29, it says, 'Bear in mind that the Lord has given you,'" that's really important, he has given you, he has gifted you the Sabbath. And that is why on the sixth day he gives you bread for 2 days. Everyone is to stay where they are on the seventh day. No one is to go out." Isn't it interesting that the very first commands around a group of people to keep the Sabbath was actually about staying at home? No one's to go out. It wasn't like a corporate gathering, worship, the whole thing. It was actually, no, stay at home, rest. So the people rested, or they Sabbathed, is what the text says, on the seventh day. So that's kind of the key idea out of all of that mammoth reading that Don did this morning. Now, if you turn over to chapter 20, from this period of time to where they turn up to receive the Ten Commandments, a period of time has gone by, and they are starting to get used to this rhythm of Sabbath, or this idea of living off the generosity of God on the seventh day. So for those of you that know the story, we now come to the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai. And in just a quick summary in one sense, chapter 20 is all about the Ten Commandments. The first verse we see like a preamble, if you like, "I am the Lord your God, this is who I am." That was very common in this kind of agreement that was worked out in the ancient world. The first commandment, no gods before me, and then there was no image before me, and then don't misuse the name of the Lord your God. That was the third commandment. And then we come to verse 8. And verse 8 is this: "Remember the Sabbath day." How? By keeping it holy. So the day is holy. Don't profane it, right? Keep it holy. Verse 9, 6 days you shall labour and do all of your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servants. Now, I never let my male or female servants do anything on the Sabbath. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Nor your animals, I say to the dog, stay still, stay. Nor any foreigner residing in your towns, and I'm going to unpack that briefly next time. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Okay, so we're going to notice a couple of extra things from the text, and we'll add them to our framework. So the fourth thing for our framework is this. The Sabbath is not the same thing as a day off. I'll say it again. The Sabbath is not the same thing as a day off. Did you pick up that through our reading that that the Sabbath is set apart as holy or special? All of us in this room this morning, we completely understand the concept of a day off. Man, we're Kiwis. We're all about the day off, right? But what is a day off? Technically, a day off is a day in which we don't work for our employer, or in theory. We still carry our phones. Anyway, we shouldn't work for our employer on our day off. However, we still work. We run errands, we pay the bills, we do the shopping, we mow the lawns, or we go and play. We might see a movie. And for people like me who are slightly undisciplined, a day off is really a day put aside for me to catch up on all the things that I probably should have incorporated into my week that I haven't, that my lovely wife is saying, hey, deal with this. So I go, yes, sweetheart. That's how I summarize my day off. But Eugene Peterson calls this kind of day off, and please excuse the language, but he calls it the bastard Sabbath, the illegitimate child of the seventh day. The Sabbath is not a day off, nor is it, and everyone listen carefully, the Sabbath is not just about going to church. Now, Sunday means different things to different people. For consumers, Sunday is the day to shop. For doers, it is the day to tackle the to-do list, or the marital whiteboard list. For the careerist, it's the day to get ahead on emails or other aspects of business administration. For the sports lover, well, that's self-explanatory. For church people, Sunday often starts off with people coming to church, and then the rest of the day is similar to day offing yourself. You're folding washing, you're watching movies, you're catching up on social media. Sometimes this means that we get to the end of Sunday exhausted. Can anyone relate to that? Yeah. So it just means that while it might have been a good day, I'm not saying it wasn't a good day, it might have been a great day, but I'm not sure whether it ticks the box of what God would intend as a Sabbath. Now, John Mark Comer, he says this. He says, the thing is, we get how to worship at church, we get how to shop, we get how to play. All of us completely understand how to consume entertainment, but very few of us know how to genuinely rest. And as I thought about that, I think he's right. I think most of us confuse relaxation with restoration. I find it astonishing that the average Kiwi watches about 2 hours of TV a day, alongside a further 2 to 2.5 hours on social media. So that's 4.5 hours a day of screen time, not including screen time that you would have in your employment. My family will tell you that I love binge watching TV shows. I may have just watched the entire Stargate reruns, for those of you that know how old that is and how long that goes for. But as I was thinking about this, a question that I have is that when we do that, I mean, like, how many of us would finish binge watching a series and then come away feeling refreshed, full of clarity and reinvigorated? How many of us will come away from binge watching something feeling rested? I think most of us just escape our life for a few hours and then come back to the same old problems, half the time then losing sleep that night. According to the text, the Sabbath is a holy day. It's a day that's set apart for God. It is a day dedicated to the Lord. And I think I'm getting better at Sabbath as I've come to really understand what it means, not just in concept, but in reality. Now, just to clarify a couple of things. If you hear people refer to Sunday as the Sabbath, Sundays are not the Sabbath. In the text, the Sabbath day was always now what we would say is Saturday. Now, in church history, the church comes along and tries to rewrite it and says the new Sabbath is a Sunday. But actually, technically, I'm not comfortable with that because it's actually not really what is in the text. I think for a range of reasons, that move was made. And so Saturday is the Sabbath. Sunday we could actually define as the Lord's Day because the scripture actually does that. So that's kind of where I sort of sit. And so for me personally, and then there's what I call the Sabbath principle. And the Sabbath principle is where you actually go, I can't do this on Saturday, but you know what? I can do this on a Thursday or a Monday or whatever. Now, I think it's up to each of us in our hearts to decide how that will work. But do it as an act of worship. And just go, Lord, I'm setting time aside to seek you and to rest in a way that you want me to rest. So for me, that's Monday. And on Mondays, I now ask some key questions. Does any activity I choose to do bring me rest? Can I worship while doing my chosen activity? Can I do my activity and meditate on scriptures at the same time? And any activity I do, is it refreshing? Does it cause me to delight in creation? Now, activity is not a bad thing, right? So on the Sabbath, don't just sit on the couch and do nothing. But ask yourself, is this activity restful, refreshing, and is it or can it be a form of worship? And for me personally, if the answer is yes, then I enjoy it guilt-free. Because we live in a world that is always enticing us to be busy. As I said before, right? If you guys are looking for a sign, here's some signs. So if the answer is yes, then I enjoy it guilt-free. If the answer is no, or maybe, then I'm getting better at holding off, as there are 6 other days to do these things. Now, when I say worship, right, I don't necessarily mean sung worship or just listening to worship music or studying the Bible all day long. By worship, I mean that you intentionally feed your soul with beauty in order to prompt your soul with spontaneous delight and wonder. It took me a while to work on that wording. But remember, Sabbath can be translated delight. So what is it that will bring me gratitude and joy in God's presence? I mentioned last week that Mondays for me have become this. Berrenpool Golf Course has become my haven. I go and I lose discs. It's fantastic. but I'll lie under a tree at some point and just give God just worship in my heart, gratitude in my heart for my life, for what I do and my place in things. And that helps me to come back refreshed for Tuesdays. So I believe there's a way of curating beauty that will lead us all to a place of worship. So, yes, come to church. Yes, read the scriptures. Please pray, please sing. But I would expand our thinking that on your day of rest, make sure you include good food. I believe catching up maybe with people who are deep friends, especially friends, brothers and sisters in Christ. The Sabbath is about bringing life. It's not about shallow relationships. It's about going deeper. Get out in nature. I think you can't get out in nature enough. For those of you who are parents, make sure that you have intentional fun with your kids while demonstrating these disciplines. Do things that will make you break out in your heart in spontaneous worship of God. So that's the fourth thing. The Sabbath is more than just a day off. Now, when we look at the text, it will lead to our fifth thing. Note that the Sabbath is both a command and a gift. It is commanded. The text is very simple. Remember the Sabbath. You'll notice that was a common theme. Remember the Sabbath. But it is a gift. I have given you the Sabbath. I have gifted you the Sabbath. And theologians point out that this commandment is the fourth out of the 10. And it is the bridge between the first three, which is all about our relationship with God. If you've never looked at the 10 Commandments like that, the first three is all about us and God. You and God. How should I relate to God? Look at the first 3 commandments. Commandments 5 to 10 is all about our relationship with each other. So don't steal, don't murder, don't commit adultery. Life gets very, very tricky when we break those commandments, right? So they're there for our protection and for the good of the community. But the Sabbath day is the only practice of rhythm that is commanded in the 10. And I want you to think about that, right? Isn't it interesting that the 10 commandments don't say, thou shalt pray? Sorry, I don't mean to point. Sorry, Derek, I wasn't picking on you. Sorry, thou shalt pray, Derek. Maybe that was for you. All of these, it's the only spiritual discipline that is in the 10 commandments. And if you think about it, I like to sort of think that the 10 commandments are what we call the bare minimum morality, right? One spiritual discipline is bare minimum, and we're encouraged to command this one. But it's not prayer, it's not silence and solitude, it's not even read your Bible, but it's the Sabbath. And you've got to ask, well, why is it like that? And I believe it's there because I think keeping Sabbath fosters all of the other disciplines. Now, I've already covered this a little bit, but I think it's good to reiterate it. There's all sorts of debate over whether the followers of Jesus have to keep the Sabbath, i.e. as a literal Saturday. And the debate is it part of the New Testament covenant? Is it still a command binding us or not? And most Christian scholars would argue no. They would say it was part of the Torah for Israel. They would say that there is no command to practice the Sabbath in the New Testament. Neither Jesus, Paul, or any of the apostles command us to do that. They would go on to say that now on Sunday we have the Lord's Day, in which we worship together, and that there is a command around that as a church, that we should not forsake the meeting together with each other. And then building on that, they would say that we just sort of live around this idea with a spirit of restfulness all week long because of what Christ accomplished on the cross. That's the majority position. And it's kind of important to understand that. And then you have another group of scholars that will say, no, we must keep it on the Saturday because everything else in the Ten Commandments still applies, so why not that? And then there's me, just put it out there. And I'm slightly different from these positions, right? Because, because it's such an important thing, and because Jesus well knew that the church was going to be made up largely of Gentiles, I would have loved it if he just had what I call the Gentile clause, right? Because we're not Jewish, or a lot of us in the room, I'm assuming, are not Jewish. But it's this balance of thinking that we can't forget its importance as it's still embedded in the Ten Commandments. And, breaking the commandment not to murder it still carries a whole ton of weight now. And so I think I'm comfortable with the concept that it is a principle. And the reason that I say that is because we know that when we come before God and worship, when we seek Him, He draws near to us. Now, some of you will be sitting here going, oh, maybe I should be doing it on a Saturday. If that is you, may the Lord richly bless you. I was thinking about it this morning. I was thinking, the irony on this is I thought, man, if I was going to start a church, and I'm not going to, but I'm just saying if I was, ironically, I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool to meet on a Friday night as part of like a kick-off to a Sabbath, and then make sure that the rest of the Saturday was rest. A friend of mine she's in the Seventh-day Adventist church, and we hired her as our youth worker, children's worker years ago. Oh, she was brilliant, because she was like, she would go to church on Saturday, and then she would come back fully energized for her role on Sunday morning, because for her that was the first day of the week. And she loved the Salvation Army and what we did, but she would wrestle. This was the one point of tension for her. But anyway, Jesus was an adamant practitioner of the Sabbath. He never broke the command of the Sabbath. He broke some of the things done on the Sabbath according to Jewish tradition, but he never broke the Sabbath. He also never said anything to cancel it or annul it. The other 9 commandments are not in question, so why this one? And it is the one command that is rooted in the creation account. And it's a reminder to us all to remember who our Creator is. As I said last week, in 6 days God created the world, and on the 7th He rested. He blessed that day and He made it holy. And that is the explanation why. The Sabbath still stands as a rhythm of creation, and we all live in creation. Now, John Mark Comer says, and I've got a quote up here, it says, fighting about whether we have to keep the Sabbath, or at least have a Sabbath rhythm, is like fighting as to whether we need to keep the law of gravity. If you go to war with gravity, you're going to lose. Right? It just is. We ignore it at our own peril. Think about it. This idea is massively countercultural. I said last week that Sabbath is coming whether we like it or not. But what kind of Sabbath will you have? Will you have one of rest, or will you have one of brokenness? I love the language of the text. The Lord has given you the Sabbath. It is a gift, and like any good gift, I want to enjoy it. So, the last part of our framework for today is this. Notice that the command is to remember the Sabbath. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I am prone to forgetting things real quick. I mean, you're talking to someone who loses car keys all the time, and I just forget things that we talked about yesterday. I need to apologise to some of you because I know I said to someone this morning, "Hi, have we met before?" And that person said, "Yes, Matt, we talked last week." That is something about how I'm wired, and I don't mean to, but I forget things really easy. And this is why so much preaching and teaching at church is about things you already know. Because as people, we need to hear things again and again and again. It's just this whole thing of just of the need to refresh ourselves consistently with key ideas, right? So the idea of the word remember in the Hebrew is this kind of concept that when we are remember, it's not just about information. When we remember God's way, it's got to translate into our character. It's way deeper. We go remember, that's right. Information, a time, an event. But no, in the Hebrew, it's actually deeper than that. It's about taking that information and putting it into practice. But it's more than putting it into practice, it's actually about becoming part of us. Now, when we do that, when we remember that there's a rhythm to creation, that we work for 6 days and then we rest, we cannot help but remember that creation is not here by mistake. It is the product of a brilliant mind. When we remember Sabbath, we remember that life is more than a war with the curse for 6 days to continuously profit from the ground. When we remember Sabbath, we remember that life is a gift to receive in worship of the one who gifted it. When we remember Sabbath, we remember that life is hard, but that it is also good. The world is full of evil and pain, but it is also full of wonder and kindness and generosity. It helps us get perspective. All of life comes to us as a gift, and we owe it to our Creator in His lavish generosity to enjoy it. And when I was thinking about how I could illustrate this, I was thinking about all of us in this room this morning who are parents, right? When your kids were small and you bought your kids a gift for their birthday or maybe Christmas, what is the best way that they could have honoured you with in receiving that gift? And as parents, the answer is easy. We would want our kids to enjoy the gift. And I think it's the same for our Heavenly Father and us. So how do we worship God gratefully? There are many ways, but I'd just like to, put it out there. Have you been outside today? Have you looked at the world around us and gone, Lord, thank you so much for the time and place in which we live? I think if you haven't done that this morning, then this afternoon, let me encourage you, get out in nature and enjoy it. Just enjoy it. I think when we do that, it becomes an act of worship. So, to recap our framework so far, the Sabbath is built into the rhythm of creation. It is blessed. It has been made holy. It is a day in which we find God. And if you want to find God, you don't have to travel or visit cathedrals or holy places. We talked last week about this idea of the architecture of time. But it is a day for rest and worship. It is not just a day off in which you go to church in the morning and then go and do unrestful activities. It is a command, but more importantly, it is a gift. And it is a day that we are to remember.